Morning, everyone. Earlier today at the Caucus meeting, had a very active discussion on a wide variety of issues, but we were particularly pleased that Dr. Henry Louis Gates, the prominent Harvard historian, was with us to share clips from his new film on Reconstruction and remind us of our long journey that we've been on in this country to make sure that we can bring the values of liberty and justice for all and equal protection under the law to life. In introducing Dr. Gates, I reminded everyone in the room that 400 years ago this month, June of 1619, the first slave ship left the west coast of Africa and arrived 2 months later in Virginia. Thus began a long journey of the African American presence here in the United States of America. Dr. Gates has cataloged it almost unlike no one else, from slavery through emancipation to Reconstruction, Reconstruction to Jim Crow, Jim Crow through the Civil Rights Movement, through the years of President Barack Obama, and now to the moment that we're in. And it was an opportunity for us to reflect on why we do what we do as Democrats fighting for the people, particularly as it relates to H.R. 1 and our democracy reform legislation, and the effort to make sure that every single American, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of zip code, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, regardless of religion, has an opportunity to participate in our democracy. And we, of course, will continue to dedicate ourselves to that cause as we move forward in an era of voter suppression and in an era of some, even those in power, trying to turn back the clock as we continue to try to move America forward. Also at the meeting, Jan Schakowsky, Doris Matsui, and Connor Lamb announced the relaunch of our task force on aging that will focus on the well-being of older Americans, consistent with our For the People agenda, where we've promised to make sure that we reach out to every single community to get things done on their behalf. And in the case of older Americans, our promise to make sure that we will protect Social Security and protect Medicare and protect their well-being, as some on the other side of the aisle endeavor to slash and burn the social safety net in a manner that is highly irresponsible. We also announced, and Speaker Pelosi has emphasized, our weekend of action on health care in the United States of America. We expect that there will be over 100 different member-led events that will take place on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday of this weekend to emphasize what Democrats have been doing on the question of lowering health care costs, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and driving down the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs, and what we intend to continue to do. We will not be swayed by the fact that the Grim Reaper continues to obstruct progress in the United States of America and that the Senate has turned into a legislative graveyard. We're going to continue to make it clear to the American people that we're committed to the cause of lowering health care costs and protecting people with pre-existing conditions and lowering the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs. We want to find common ground. We want to work with the other side of the aisle. We want to get things done, but we need the Senate and we need the president to be willing to do their job. Let me now yield to our dynamic vice chair from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my friend Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Hakeem, and good morning, and welcome to appropriations season. This week we'll begin voting on our first 5 spending bills, and as we know, the budget is a blueprint for our values. And House Democrats have constructed through these appropriation bills pathways for success and opportunity for all Americans. There is no greater point of contrast to our vision for America than the Trump budget proposal, which took a wrecking ball to program services that millions of hardworking families rely on. Trump stripped resources from students, schools, and teachers. House Democrats, through these bills, are making historic investments in early childhood initiatives and after-school programs, expanding student assistance to attend college, and putting resources into apprenticeships, workforce training, and other pathways to good-paying jobs. Republicans are once again trying to turn the clock back on women's health and reproductive freedoms. House Democrats in these bills block the Trump administration's dangerous Title X domestic gag rule, put reproductive rights back into the International Health Report. Republicans are playing political games with the census. Democrats are investing billions to ensure every voice and vote is counted. There wasn't a dry eye in the room just a few minutes ago when Skip Gates was talking about finding John Lewis's great-grandfather's voter registration card from 1867. And the noticeable thing about that was the last member of John Lewis's family to vote until the work that he did crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge and all the work he did on voting rights. And as John broke down in our caucus thinking about that, we can't help but think about the H.R. 1, the protections that we have put in for voting rights that are being held up in the Senate, and that is the most important connection that we have to making sure that our democracy continues to thrive, is to protect that vote for every single American. President Trump has also proposed cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, a direct contrast to what he promised the American people he would do as President of the United States. We have protected those programs and made investments in children nutrition programs, SNAP, and healthcare assistance. Republicans in this month, this week, tomorrow is the anniversary of the shootings in Orlando, and it's Pride Month, but Republicans continue to stonewall our gun safety reform bills. House Democrats in the appropriation bills, for the first time in way too long, are being able to lift the dangerous ban on gun violence prevention research, and are able to fund our federal background check system to make sure that it works well. Republicans continue to deny the existence of climate change. House Democrats in these bills are taking proactive steps to protect our planet by preserving public lands, ensuring access to clean air and clean water. And finally, the president chose to storm out of our latest infrastructure meeting, but House Democrats are moving forward in this bill to make sure that we are building housing, that we are building water infrastructure, that we have increased access to broadband service in our rural communities. These bills are building a foundation of a strong, inclusive America that is for the people.
Thank you, Katherine. Questions?
I'm going to start on the appropriations portion that you spoke about. A lot of the candidates running for president for your party are talking about abortion, and they're talking about the Hyde Amendment specifically. But the bill that's going to come to the floor later this week has the Hyde Amendment in it. Why is there that split between the people who are running for president and what's happening here in the House?
Well, it's not clear to me that that's a split, and I believe that every single candidate for president who served in either the House or the Senate, every single one of them voted for an appropriations bill that contains the Hyde Amendment. It's a bashful group today.
Can you talk a little bit about the cost of living adjustment that was supposed to be in one of the appropriation bills and that's now been pulled? What was the issue with that, and does leadership feel like they could have communicated that better with members in any way to kind of protect those that were in frontline districts?
It's my understanding that Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise, as well as the head of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, all support a cost of living adjustment for members of the United States House of Representatives. I presume that there are ongoing discussions that are taking place between our leadership and their leadership, but that is probably a question that is best directed elsewhere.
Can you take us through, there's a lot of confusion for a lot of Americans between impeachment inquiry, what you all are doing, and especially civil contempt, criminal contempt. Can you explain what the resolution does today on camera for people, and where you think the caucus is headed over the summer as far as impeachment goes?
The resolution that we will vote on today is a civil contempt resolution that will authorize the House of Representatives to go into court to enforce the subpoenas that have been issued both to the Attorney General and to Don McGahn that they have at least in part defied. We're of the view that no single person in the United States of America is above the law. The president is not above the law. The so-called Attorney General is not above the law. The Treasury Secretary is not above the law. The Commerce Secretary is not above the law. The former White House counsel is not above the law. We are going to use every available means at our disposal to enforce our right as a separate and co-equal branch of government to hold a potentially lawless administration accountable. We are taking a meaningful step in that direction today. I also expect that Chairman Nadler will continue his series of hearings on obstruction of justice that began yesterday and will continue those hearings and include an exploration on potential abuses of power as well as the culture of corruption that appears to exist at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Katherine, did you want to add anything? No.
I just want to add that we are continuing on the same tracks that we've had. We are going to legislate and investigate. And that is obvious just from what the Judiciary Committee is doing this week. With the hearing yesterday that they had with John Dean and other legal experts trying to get the facts out to the American people, an analysis as we see this cover-up continue from the White House. And at the same time, today, the Judiciary Committee is looking into big tech. And is there a need to look at big tech from an antitrust perspective? We're going to continue to prioritize the For the People agenda every single day. And at the same time, do what we have to do, as the chairman said, to make sure that nobody is above the law and that the facts are getting out to the American people.
For Congresswoman Clark, a lot of people in our profession and in the political class have been waiting for your caucus's progressive wing to start acting like the Freedom Caucus and cause all sorts of headaches for the Speaker. The Hyde Amendment was an excellent opportunity for that to occur, and it doesn't seem to. Why is that?
Let me be clear on the Hyde Amendment. I would repeal it tomorrow. And I think that is overwhelmingly the feeling of our caucus, which is being pro-choice, understanding how tied reproductive freedoms are to the economic well-being of women in this country. But at this point, with a Senate that is leading with obstruction, with a White House that seems hell-bent on turning the clock back on women in this country, we felt that the Hyde Amendment was going to become a focal point that could collapse everything in the Labor H bill that is so good for American families. And we need to do two things. We need to keep speaking out about the Hyde Amendment and its effect on low-income women and what it does to deny access to fundamental health care for women in this country. And at the same time, work hard to make sure that we are electing people who understand that women's rights, women's health care isn't up for grabs, that these are constitutional rights and that they are fundamental to what we're fighting for. But at this point, to make sure that we got those appropriation bills with all the things they do for American families through, it was, agreed upon that that had to be our course at this particular point in our nation's history and where we are with the makeup of Congress and the White House to make sure those bills got passed.
Related to that, on the appropriations bills generally, you've got a lot of riders in there, such as forbidding money for the border wall. How confrontational are you guys being, and how likely is it we're going to see another shutdown, the third one, when we get to September or beyond, given the stance that you guys have taken in these bills?
Well, there was a reckless 35-day government shutdown that ended with Donald Trump engaging in an unconditional surrender. He lost. We reopened the government. We didn't give him a dime to do it because it was irresponsible that he was trying to hold the American people hostage for his medieval border wall. We would expect that he will not go down that reckless course again. And House Democrats are going to continue to function, continue to legislate, continue to appropriate, continue to investigate, and continue to litigate as we've done successfully in the Article 3 federal court system. At some point, we're going to get tired of all the winning because that's what we have been doing. Not Donald Trump, who apparently has been throwing temper tantrums because he has no meaningful legislative accomplishment. That said, as Katherine indicated, we are willing to work with Donald Trump to lower the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, and we are willing to work with Donald Trump to fix our crumbling infrastructure. We simply need him to come back to the negotiating table. Rachel?
I have two questions, if you don't mind. The first, back on the pay increase issue, you mentioned continuing to negotiate with Republicans, but some of your own members were really worried about that vote too. I mean, do you think you're going to be able to convince some of these frontliners that this is a vote that they are safe taking? And then the other piece of this was, you mentioned the hearing yesterday, and it seemed like a lot of folks were saying that it didn't really break through to reach the people you guys wanted to reach. Do you still intend on getting Mueller to testify publicly, even if it means a subpoena? What is the leadership's latest thinking on that?
It's my understanding that there are ongoing negotiations between Leader Hoyer and Leader McCarthy about the best way to proceed with respect to the cost of living adjustment, which is not a pay increase. We don't have the capacity actually to increase our pay in the 116th Congress that we're in right now. This would simply be a cost of living adjustment that has been suspended, as I understand it, over the last 10 years. If we're going to proceed, we will proceed in a bipartisan way. And if we don't proceed in a bipartisan way, we will see no cost of living adjustment. With respect to the hearing yesterday, it was simply the beginning of a process of exploring the obstruction of justice that Bob Mueller documented in his report and 22-month-long investigation. It's my view that Bob Mueller should testify publicly before the American people sooner rather than later. That is the view of the overwhelming majority of the House Democratic Caucus. He spent 22 months conducting an incredibly important investigation. There were 3 conclusions. Russia attacked our democracy and interfered with our election for the sole purpose of artificially placing Donald Trump at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The Trump campaign welcomed that cooperation. Donald Trump and others appear to have obstructed justice in connection with the investigation that was being conducted as it relates to the attack on our democracy. Those are 3 serious conclusions. Bob Mueller has a duty to the American people to bring those conclusions to life in public testimony before the United States Congress.
After you pass this resolution this afternoon and you have the power to go to the courts, how quickly do Democrats plan to do that? Are we going to see that immediately, or, yesterday you had the DOJ cooperating with Chairman Nadler? Is there a sense that you're going to allow them some more time to do similar things, to share some of these documents, or do you expect a mad rush to the court?
Yeah, the timeline will in part depend on whether the DOJ continues to cooperate with our legitimate Article I powers of oversight and investigation. And we began to see yesterday, in the face of the possibility of either a criminal contempt citation or proceeding with inherent contempt, that they began to see things differently all of a sudden. If they continue to cooperate with us, I would expect that we will not race to the courthouse. And with respect to Don McGahn, we'll see. Seems to me that Mr. McGahn is in a particularly vulnerable situation as a private citizen. He should either begin to cooperate immediately or face the consequences, beginning with the civil contempt matter that will be voted out of the House of Representatives today. Last question.
Chairman, getting back to Rachel's question, do you support subpoenaing Mueller if he won't come testify willingly?
It's my view that we should proceed with caution as it relates to Bob Mueller's testimony, in part because, as you know, the law requires us to try to find an accommodation that's reasonable with the recalcitrant witness. And Bob Mueller, who's a well-respected American, a talented law enforcement professional, a war hero, has indicated that he has some reluctance about his public testimony. And so we're working through that reluctance right now. And I think Chairman Nadler is doing the responsible thing by not jumping to a subpoena, because ultimately, if we have to fight this out in court, we need to demonstrate that we've been reasonable in our approach to him. I think to date, we've been more than reasonable. Thank you, everyone.